Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kyla Hanington, and I'm the Public Engagement and Outreach Division Manager with the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights. It is once again my pleasure to welcome you all this evening for another in our Elephant We Don't See Diversity Dialogues series with the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. Those of you who have been with us for a while may know that this series has been going on for 2.5 years. It started in the very beginning of the pandemic when Michelle, Hamiel, and I got together to start talking about some books that with a social justice bent. And it has morphed over the years. And Michelle left in the summer for a wonderful new job. And so we congratulate Michelle, but it's been hard to continue without her. She's been so wonderful. And in her stead, we've been very, very fortunate to have guest hosts. And so with us again tonight from the Office of Human Rights, we have Jose Villegas, who's the Assistant Director of the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights, and Renee Battle-Brooks, who is the Executive Director of the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights. And they have been actively part of the diversity dialogue. Jose actually joined Michelle and I in the spring sometimes, and Renee and Jose have been consistently with me doing this since August, along with rotating guests from the library. And so tonight, our very special guest host is Kofi Bart Martin, and he is on the staff of PGCMLS. He works in the Sojourner Truth African American Collection at the Oxon Hill Branch Library. He's originally from Ghana and has lived in the Washington area since Ronald Reagan. He writes poetry, prose, composes music. He plays a piano and organ, and all around is a fantastic guy. And we're super excited to have him with us tonight. We are talking tonight about this book, Not a Nation of Immigrants. It is by Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz. And tonight I'm actually going to read a little bit of a blurb to get us started because it's a pretty amazing book. And for you to maybe understand a little bit of its impact and who you're going to hear from tonight, before I read the blurb, I do want to let you know that of the 4 people that you have with you talking about this book, 0 out of 4 of them were born in the United States, and 3 of the 4 of them were not born American citizens. So this is the hosts that are going to talk about Not a Nation of Immigrants. Whether in political debates or discussions about immigration around the kitchen table, many of us, regardless of party affiliation, proudly say that the United States is a nation of immigrants. This pervasive myth emerged in the 1950s when John F. Kennedy, then a U.S. Senator, published an influential book, A Nation of Immigrants. Historian Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz explains that the idea that we live in a land of opportunity, founded and built by immigrants, became a convenient response by the ruling class and its brain trust to the 1960s demands for decolonization, justice, reparations, and social equality. This widely accepted and feel-good myth, which promotes a benign narrative of progress, is grossly inaccurate. And in this paradigm-shifting new book, Dunbar-Ortiz shows how this dishonest and pernicious ideology serves to mask and diminish the United States' history of settler colonialism, genocide, white supremacy, and slavery, all of which we still grapple with today. So I will leave that there. Welcome all 3 of you and the viewers to the conversation.
Thank you, Kyla, for welcoming us. And while I didn't finish the whole book because I got a copy too late, but it's a very intense book, I have to say. And her sense of intellectual process of developing all the chapters are so profound. And it calls upon us, those of us who have bought into the myth of the land of immigrants, we will need to do a paradigm shift to come to terms with the reality, not the theory on paper and some of the liberal ideas that they put forward just to pat themselves on the back that they are doing something wonderful. So I hope we engage in a very exciting conversation about this book.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kofi. As I'm reading it, it's turning everything that I thought I knew on its head. Everything. And I agree that it is very, it's thick, it's dense, the read, right? It's very well done, but literally, like every paragraph, you have to stop and reflect and think about what it is that she's saying, and fact checking yourself, and or examining what you were taught and what your beliefs are in who we are as a nation, right? It's an excellent book, but you have to go in knowing that you're going to hear maybe some uncomfortable truths or different ways of thinking about who we are as a nation.
Yeah, and I also second. I mean, what Coffee and what you said, Ms. Waterbrooks, because I guess for me it was interesting that that going to history, which I thought, the historical perspective of this book, right? Because I know that when I was in college, one of my kind of minor concentration was the United States, Latin America, and history, but it's kind of interesting just to see the topic in terms of the discussion, because I guess I bought into this idea of a nation of immigrants, right? And I bought too. I mean, I took it, I accepted it, and I accepted it because of what the pieces of information that we are being taught in school, about what the history is, and I did not know that the idea of this nation of immigrants, it was created based on this book that President Kennedy wrote, or I did not know that. So that was very enlightening, I guess, for me to just learn that is where this ideology was taken, but it doesn't reflect the true reality of the history of this country.
Yeah, I felt like you, like we're like I'm a history major. Now, admittedly, it was Canadian history, but I like history. I felt like I knew things. I truly felt like I knew things. And I was reading this book, and my takeaway was I know nothing. And it was some combination of lovely to have my mind open and to be exposed to these ideas and ways of thinking and ways of understanding history and parts of history that I did not know. Like, I was grateful for the experience, and also discombobulating. And can I read? Does anybody mind? Because I would just like to read the first page, just the first page, to think about what this was like in our current situation. And this will be the last reading I do tonight. But for those of you who haven't read the book yet, you sit down with it, you open it, and you read this. In the waning days of the Obama presidency, the nation of immigrants' liberal ideology dynamically soared with the 2015 Broadway musical Hamilton. In the musical, Hamilton and the Frenchman Marquis de Lafayette celebrate their actions at the Battle of Yorktown by proclaiming, "Immigrants, we get things done." Of course, the United States did not yet exist in 1781 when the Yorktown engagement took place, and neither of the men were immigrants by any definition. Lafayette was a wealthy Frenchman militarist who threw his lot into the gunplay and then returned home to France without a thought of remaining in North America, while Hamilton was a citizen of Great Britain, as were all the secessionists who created the United States out of the 13 British colonies. Citizens in Great Britain's overseas colonies, including the 13 colonies on the Atlantic coast of North America and those in the Caribbean, were free to move wherever they wished. So it goes on, but I'll spare you from listening to me read the entire book to you, because I don't think anybody wants that. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, you finish your thought, because I want to.
But I was just like, just this idea, like just that first paragraph, which is like, I hadn't thought about the idea that Marquis de Lafayette, as someone who's just popping over for a little bit, is not an immigrant, or that people, British and specific, British people, and I think specifically wealthy British men who we're talking about in a lot of this, they're British subjects. So they were moving. She later talks about like Hamilton going to New York was the same as somebody from South Carolina going to New York. Like, this was not like a white British person going, like that this was not something to get that excited about, frankly, that it was normative, that there was no restriction of movement, and no matter what these people were, they were not immigrants. And that just like right there, that first paragraph was, I mean, it just was a paradigm shift for me.
Yeah. And I want to talk in depth about sort of the Hamilton character and all of that. But before we get there, I want to kind of explore, like, why do we, right, all of us here as Americans, because America is a melting pot. Now, and again, maybe that's turned on its head in this book, but we are a melting pot no matter how we got here. But why do we find such comfort in this idea that we're a nation of immigrants? Why is that so comforting?
I think let me be a bit reflective about even the colonial times. All those people who were born in Ghana, in the Gold Coast, were British citizens because it was the British Gold Coast. And then after independence, they all lost their British citizenship. But for when I was born, and the older people who used to be British, they reveled in that idea that I was a British, you see, and they are as dark as charcoal, you see. And so the idea of being a part of a dream, a part of something that cannot easily be described, but it's there, and we buy into it. It gives you, sometimes it gives us this sense of profound appreciation for being part of this fabric. But it also gives you a sense of, sometimes if you don't take care, you wouldn't question anything, and you just embrace it because somebody has said so.
Yeah. What do you think, Kyla?
Well, I was gonna say that's super insightful. The part of like we embrace it because somebody said so, like that, I feel like you just looked right into my soul, because that's true of a lot of what I do. Is I hear a soundbite and I believe that it's true. And I think to your question, Renee, why do we embrace that? I'm somebody who has said that. I'm not even going to sit here right now and pretend that though that phrase has never come out of my mouth. I have said that, and in some ways, it's particularly unforgivable for me to have said it because my education. Part of my education in my undergrad includes First Nation studies. So it's not like I am not aware for people who are in the United States, that's for Indigenous people studies. I would not have felt that I was unaware. And so to answer the question though, why do we say that? I can tell you why I've said that. I have said that as a counterpoint to what I perceive as anti-immigration rhetoric from certain people or certain platforms that are, I feel, hostile to newcomers. And from my perspective, I've been like, oh my gosh, look at the creativity, look at the passion, look at the friendships, look at the richness, the cultural richness, this is, immigration's awesome. And this is a nation of immigrants, and we are all immigrants. And as I say that, I am embracing Indigenous people. I'm embracing enslaved African people and their descendants. So, and yet I have been somebody who has spoken like that. And it has come from in my case, I'll speak frankly, a political ideology and a belief system about the value of immigration. And using that phrase, and again, like Kofi, not realizing that that was a John F. Kennedyism. I didn't, I perceived it as a fact that I then passed on.
And I think for me, it's just we kind of embrace it because of that is what we see in our time, right? In our time, we see multiculturalism everywhere we go in the United States. So I don't know whether it is similar to the analogy, but when I guess Plato was describing the allegory of the cave, the people were to see certain things. So you just see what you see in front of you, and you think, okay, that is which I see people from this area, I see people from that area. So that for me that's evidence to me that, okay, we are a nation of immigrant, not knowing what led to the story or the ideology of this nation of immigrant. It's just what we see, not knowing the historical. I mean, some might not know the historical. Even if we do know the historical, we might know like maybe 10% of the historical, not the entirety of the historical piece. So I guess that is what kind of for us you embrace it because that's what you see, and then you feel that you can achieve something because you're on the equal footing that some other people. So we buy into this idea of being able to, and so you accept. I think without question, you accept the idea of a multi or a nation of immigrant theory or argument.
Yeah, and I was just reflecting. About a month and a half ago, I was at an event. This is before I read the book, and there was a politician at this event on the national scale, but a local politician, national. So you can decide whether it was Senate or Congress. And he was asked to give sort of remarks, and he said, and we all, are immigrants. And he started, and I'm like, that's not, he was saying this, and it was the way he said it. And I looked around, I thought, well, that discounts me because my fam, we didn't immigrate here. Right. And I looked around and I thought, so where are my, nation of, our American nation, First Nation, where anybody here in this room, like that just discounted them. Like they are the original. Right. And that was the first time that it struck me. It was the way he said it. And I thought, how can you be an elected official and be so tone deaf? How can you not sort of hear how you said that? And all of a sudden I felt like no, that's not true. Right. But and maybe to answer my own question, maybe there is comfort in that when we say it, because I think that the United States of America, we do have people from all over the world that become Americans, that are Americans, right? That Americans don't look a particular way, sound a particular way, right? Like we do embrace everybody. And once you're American, it doesn't matter, right? And maybe that's how we explain sort of that difference maybe from other cultures. Like, yes, England has similar, but, you go to a lot of other places and it's very, everybody who looks the same, talks the same, right? And I think our strength is being a melting pot because we pull from all over and, we have different perspectives. And from that comes like different ways of thinking because we're open. But it is complex. But so, I mean, is it completely wrong to say like, we are now we have component, like how do you say it? Because we are not all of us, but we as a nation, immigration is a significant part of who we are. But it's not the only thing that we are.
I think there was a question or a comment there, I think from David Hamiel, I think that was the name. Daniel, but he's thinking more of our commonality, but in terms of using the word immigrant. But my sense of embracing that commonality, it precludes some people because those people who came here voluntarily, I think, can be categorized as immigrants. But for those people who had no plan of taking a long-term vacation in somebody's land and never going back and losing their ancestral connections and their roots, I think it's a misnomer to use the term immigrant.
Yeah.
And that's where, but maybe there's there's this food they have in, I think, in Louisiana, where they put everything in the pot. Is it called gumbo?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can. The best time is a gumbo. Everybody is putting, and then we don't have to worry about defining the group as this. When some people feel circumscribed out, it always reminds me of a Venn diagram.
Mm.
The Venn diagram: those who belong and those who are outside of the belonging. So this is my concept in response to Daniel's comment. But later on, let me put it out while I'm on the floor, and then we can think about that too. Is that reading through the book, a word that came to mind was complicit.
Mm-hmm.
From Africa throughout the thread through England, through the 13 colonies, through the Caribbean, there were so many people who were complicit in what has become what we know right now as the United States of America.
I was thinking I have a couple things to you. So to the gumbo analogy. So in my home country, we talk about being a mosaic. So and we would sometimes talk about being a mosaic in direct comparison to the American concept of melting pot. And I'm not here to say whether or not Canada is accurate in its self-assessment as being a mosaic. But as you were talking about the gumbo, there's all of these different components, that makes something, a rich fabric or a beautiful image is that kind of mosaic image, or a hearty stew, but it's all of these contributions that add to that. And I think in terms of being complicit, one of the parts of the book that really impacted me was her sort of different. There's a part, and I'm sorry, I said I wasn't going to read, but I'm going to read because otherwise I'm not going to be able to, I won't be able to accurately paraphrase it. And this is from page 50. It's the end of chapter 2, if anybody wanted to follow along at home. And what's happening here is she's kind of differentiating between immigration and being a settler or a settler colonialist. And she is saying, if Europeans, this is a quote actually, she's quoting somebody else, but if Europeans in the United States were immigrants, they would have joined the existing societies in the New World. Instead, they destroyed those societies and built a new one that was reinforced by later waves of settlement. The nation of immigrants rhetoric that avoids the dynamics of settler colonialism plays a role that is essential to settler colonial nation-state projects. And so really what she's saying there is that, immigrants go, you live in a different place and you sort of acclimatize to that space. I'm not saying that we're not going to say that's assimilation, because a lot of people maintain culture and language and family ties, but they acclimatize and they participate in the rules and culture and manner of that society. That's immigration. What she's talking about in the United States, particularly with early British colonizers, Scots-Irish colonizers as well, the reason that we don't consider them immigrants, or she's making this argument, is that they have destroyed. I mean, they went in very deliberately destroying what was pre-existing. She, refers to the United States Army as an occupying army in certain sections of the book, and really reframes this idea so that those of us who are descended from English colonists or Irish potato famine refugees, or both of those things, depending on which side of the line you want to come down, really has a, to your point, Kofi, about complicitness. She is really making those of us for whom that is our story, to look at not only what did my ancestors and family members do, and why were my ancestors and family members not immigrants, but in what way is Kyla Hanington not an immigrant? In what way is Kyla Hanington a further extension of a settler colonial state? And I think that is a powerful thing to consider as a reader of this book, because that actually gives us some power back once we start to think about our own contribution. And it may be, I mean, in this case, of course, a negative contribution, but our own contribution to this colonial machine.
Yeah, and if I could, it's in that same chapter, because when she said this, it's the same sort of thing. Like, you didn't come to, as you said, join. You came to destroy and to rebuild. And she says here at the beginning of chapter 2 on page 19, actually, the founders were unapologetic imperialists, chips off the old block of British imperialism, but with the added conceit of an empire for liberty, end quote, as Thomas Jefferson conceived the future. Historian David Reynolds writes that Jefferson believed the U.S. empire was destined to assume the responsibility to spread freedom around the world, starting with the North American continent and intervening abroad. Then goes on to say U.S. foreign policy was stamped with this concept and has provided the ideological motivation for all U.S. wars and interventions. I thought, wow, that's powerful. And she is definitely drawing the distinction between immigration and colonialism, right? It was powerful. And it, like I said, every paragraph I had to stop and think and process. And it's like, it has turned everything on its head to really get me to re-examine who we are truthfully. Not that it's bad, like we have to re-examine, right? To be honest with ourselves doesn't take away anything. Anyway, sorry, Kofi, you were going to say something.
Well, but also the big lie is Jefferson proposing that freedom will be spread throughout the world. And yet the owners of the land were not free.
Right.
Secondly, I've forgotten the particular page or chapter, but even there was this sense that they were beginning to call themselves the original indigenous people when if you get lost and you come to my village and you meet me there, you haven't discovered my village. You see?
Exactly.
And then you take over and you make yourself an indigene when I was there all the time.
Right.
And so some of the big lies that have been the undercurrent and undertones of even public policy, I don't know how to even fully express that idea, but it's almost criminal.
Yeah. And even Ms. Butterbrooks, even dealing with, you just mentioned Thomas Jefferson when he started and made that kind of statement, but it's how, I guess, even if he was the first one who said it, I doubt, but how other presidents continue to expand on his idea as well, right? Because that's how I always knew about the manifest destiny, or the Monroe Doctrine, but the context that is explained here, how it was this Monroe Doctrine of telling Europeans, colonial powers, that don't mess with any the Western Hemisphere it's United States to mess with, right? So it led to multiple actions later on, like that one, and then dealing with the manifest destiny of the expansion westward, west to the country, not minding whether the people that leave there or not, right? And so in that, even now, I mean, even if we were to argue, I think that still continues. It's not in the military way of this colonization of the United States, but is with the colonization of ideas, right? Of the ideas and principles and free and democracy that you still wants to expand that to other countries and impose that, or persuade this country to accept the democracy or the United States way of managing their country. So it's still the same kind of, in a way, colonization, but just not by military force, but it's more of a mind now. It's just interesting to me.
It is, yeah.
I was trying to find this. I couldn't find it, so I'm going to poorly paraphrase it, and I'm hoping that one or all three of you will know what it is that I'm talking about. She talks about or deconstructs some of the myth of the American Revolution. And I have to make sure I'm using the right language because I'm a Canadian-born person who's married to an American, and I like to use inflammatory ways of talking about the American War of Independence to upset my spouse. And so now I have to, if I have a pause, it's because I'm trying to think of non-inflammatory ways to describe the American War of Independence. And what was so interesting to me in reading this was I had believed, the story like the Boston Tea Party and like taxation without representation and, throwing off the yoke of the oppressor and, whether or not whatever. But I get the story. I believe the story. When I was reading this book, and she was talking about something I'm very familiar with, which is the Royal Proclamation of 1763. And the Royal Proclamation of 1763 is foundational in Canada because this is the Royal Proclamation by the British government that says only the Crown can treaty for land, that individual people cannot go and take land from Indigenous people, that it is a negotiation between nations. So only the Crown can negotiate with a nation for land. And so I'm very familiar with that as from a Canadian perspective. So in this book, she talks about the Royal Proclamation of 1763. It was the first time I've ever seen it in American context. And she then says that these individual founding fathers, heavy quotation marks, which she uses herself, were really what the yoke of oppression they were throwing off was the Royal Proclamation of 1763 that tried to limit them from a huge illegal land grab to line their own pocket, individual wealth, like not national wealth, but their individual wealth. And so the only quote that I could find specifically was on page 18, and this is not the detailed thing, but she says, the founders were not an oppressed, colonized people. They were British citizens being restrained by the monarch from expanding the 13 colonies to enrich themselves. And that was totally contrary to anything that I had ever heard or thought about how the United States came. Like I can joke with my husband about was the British an oppressor. Like, I mean, we can be silly as white American and Canadians. We can have this silly joke inside our marriage. But I truly believed the story from an American perspective, a white American perspective of the yoke of British oppression. And reading it here that we became our own country because we wanted to line our own pockets was a very different understanding. Did this jump out for you three?
It definitely did for me. Yeah. I'm sorry. You go, Kofi, first.
Oh, I said certainly.
You can expand.
Because colonial mentality, as expressed either in this country or in the Caribbean from the British perspective, or the French and Portuguese, all of them, and even in Africa, they had this sense of bringing let me even reflect only on Africa, bringing to civilization, education, and Christianity. And yet they were all thieves and leaving behind bastard children and grabbing everything they could get their hands on. And I always tell people, Belgium has never grown cocoa, and yet they talk about Belgian chocolate. You see? And these are some of the distortions and conflicts in thinking when you look at all these things, because these people were just land grabbers, and the roots of the soil, they were grabbing and running away to pack it somewhere. And all the gold, most of the gold in the British arsenal, they stole from us.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
So I guess, go ahead, Jose.
no, I was just going to ask him, I mean, dealing with what Kyla mentioned. So the whole list of atrocities of actions that were included in the Declaration of Independence, because I mean, it's a whole list of against what actions that the Crown took. It appeared based on what Kyla mentioned that it appeared to be a bunch of lies.
Maybe distortions, points of view. Yeah, I do love saying to my British friends, and even when I lived in England, like, oh, we threw off the yoke of tyranny. You guys were just right, right. I like to just or like, we won, right? All of this, but this does put it in perspective. Like, no, these were British subjects, British rich, wealthy, who wanted more.
Right? They didn't want a treaty between nations. They're like, leave the nations out of this. We're going to go and line and expand our own personal wealth, not even the wealth from my neighbor, my own actual pocket.
Right. So it begs the question then, what is the definition of an immigrant? What is the definition of a colonialist? And I think Kofi has pretty much given us a really good roadmap, right? What does a colonialist do? Colony, what are the motivations? What are the similarities? What are the things that are different from those? And then Kyla and I had a brief conversation. What is an expatriate?
Oh yeah.
And like, what are these? What are the duties and responsibilities? What are the rights? What is this thing? Because that really, No,
and I think where are you going? And I'll put up this question from our wonderful friend Susan Roberts. Yes. Speaking of 2.5 years, Susan Roberts has been with us for 2.5 years coming to these things, and it's just been an absolute wonderful, making my life much richer, Susan. I'm always so happy that you're with us. But I think to go to your question, like this idea of what's a settler, how do we resist that? And then what is an immigrant? What's an expat?
And maybe to Susan's question, right, exactly, right. A settler, an immigrant, what is a settler? Or who, what? Who and what is a colonialist? And maybe it's similar to a settler, maybe not. Maybe there are nuances, right? Who is an immigrant? And how does expatriation, expats play into this at all? So who wants to define a settler? To Susan's point, who wants to define what we think a settler is?
Well, I can start with immigrant.
Okay, let's start there then.
For me, an immigrant is somebody who chooses by his or her own volition to move into another space, country, among other people, and freely live there, not superimposing any of his or her cultural prerogatives upon those people he or she met, but that together they will learn from each other and grow together. I think that will be the perfect idea of an immigrant for me.
And do you then, like somebody who is going simply for work, is that an immigrant? Or somebody who is, right, does it require for an immigrant to have sort of an idea that, I plan to stay here for a while, if not for the rest of my life, but, I'm going to become part of wherever I am immigrating to?
I think that more reflects the expat for me. Because, for instance, post-independence Ghana, Maya Angelou lived in Ghana.
Right.
W.E.B. Du Bois lived there. Right. Several of the African Americans, those days, I was in this country when they became African Americans.
Right. That's a whole separate discussion.
So, so the blacks came to Ghana because Ghana was the first country to gain independence, and people were free and taking care of their own destiny.
That's
And
right.
so they wanted to participate in that and to enjoy that experience without necessarily imposing anything upon them. I think where I have the problem is the imposition of the cultural values or religious values or ethnic values uh, in the guys, especially even in colonial times, things that were cultural were imposed upon us, uh, even in the church. One of my professors in Ghana, who was also a minister, the Europeans came wearing black suits, and then Professor Dixon. And then when he was a junior minister in my hometown, which was the first Methodist church established in Ghana, and he was a junior minister, and when dressed in a white suit to go and preach, they didn't let him preach that day because he wore a white suit and didn't wear the black suit that the British wore. These were the times of the British.
Mm.
You see? And can you imagine when I go to Ghana and it's about 75 degrees, people are in jackets and coats because they say it's cold. And I go to Ghana and I'm wearing shorts and t-shirt and I'm perspiring.
Right, right.
You see, and in this weather, which is almost 80 degrees year round, and they want you to wear black suits.
80 and 100% humidity, as I recall.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then what I'm hearing you say, Kofi, is so a colonist comes with the idea of imposing upon where the colonist goes, their way of thinking, their values, what they have dictated to be correct and what others should believe.
And what they can take out.
Right, and what they can take. So steal, rape from the land. And an immigrant goes with the idea of working together and learning and growing and for you it doesn't require necessarily that I'm going to stay here, this is where I'm going, like a permanency or semi-permanency. And then a settler is part of a subset.
I think settler is more akin to the colonialists than an immigrant.
Yeah. Okay. Kyla, what do you think?
Well, so I put Susan's question back up here because I think it's really good to try to tackle and in the context of what we're talking about right now. So again, from my country and my way of being in my country, I'll say, because I think this is not true for everybody, but it was not untypical for people, white people or specifically non-Indigenous people would maybe identify themselves as settler Canadian. I'm a settler Canadian, to provide some context to their relationship to the land. So I have introduced myself or described myself as a settler Canadian. That's a word that I've used because a phrase that identifies my relationship to the land, my relationship to the people, and that in fact, in the context of this Canadian system, I know we're not in Canada, but I'm going to offer it just to be illustrative. There is no way that I would ever not be a settler Canadian. That I am not an Indigenous Canadian. Therefore, I am a settler Canadian. So that is not something that I can shift and change. I am a settler. Now, as it relates to the book, and I think to Susan's question and this idea, which is maybe more nuanced, but also more complicated, of like the difference between immigrant and settler. Is there some way I can be an immigrant in this space? And I don't mean like literally I moved to the United States, but like as a non-Indigenous person living in the United States or Canada, is there a way that I can be more immigrant and less settler? And the answer that I have to that question, and to Susan's, I think, which is a great question, is I don't know. But what keeps coming to mind for me is this book, Pulitzer Prize-winning book by Edward P. Jones called The Known World. And The Known World takes place, it looks at enslaved people and some freed Blacks in Virginia, mostly. And it was talking about it's looking at the known world and how the characters in the book, this was not a global statement, it's a fiction book, were recreating the known world. And so you would see some of the characters were able to buy their freedom out of slavery and then became enslavers because they were recreating the known world. And so to Susan's question, how do we resist becoming settlers? I think it is resisting the known world. And so that's really looking at in what ways am I recreating a system of oppression, for my own gain? So if I come to the United States from whatever country, but I've come as an immigrant by my own choice, it is a capitalist system. It's, Scrabble, get ahead, line my pockets, line my retirement fund, do it, say that I'm doing it for my kids, I'm doing it for that, but it's all about me, or me and my exact family. How do you come to this space or be born into this space and resist that known world? And I don't know that I have an easy answer, but I think being aware of the known world is a start. Being aware of the structures that have been in place from a certain colonial mindset, that if we collectively don't agree with or don't want to participate in, to try in small ways to identify the ways that we can do differently. And the reason I'm saying small ways is because I want to be realistic about what we can do inside the world in which we live. That's my stab at it. Anybody else?
I think your perspective is really interesting, because I never would have used those terms. And now after reading this, like settler Canadian has sort of kind of a negative connotation, but not the way that you explain how it's almost honoring First Nation people in Canada by not, right? So it's fascinating. I think also we have to guard against, like, I guess, like, what is the end game, right? So we are talking about all of this. I think it's acknowledging that everything is not pie and happy and good, right? That we come, right? It's really just being honest about who we are. And it's okay. It is okay to not have it all good. But it's important to acknowledge, because that's how, maybe to Susan's point as I'm talking, that's how we keep from sort of the mindset, by acknowledging, not deluding, or not being delusional about who we are and saying, oh, we are, we come from a nation of immigrants. No, we come from a nation of genocide and slavery, taking and forcing, right? That's who we are. It's not bad to say that's who we are. That's who we are. But we take that as acknowledging and understanding, because that helps explain so much. And then saying, okay, and now taking that, right? But this is who we are. We still have to embrace it, but using that as we move forward to make things better and to acknowledge, right? But simply putting our head in the sand and saying, oh, no, it was all wonderful and slavery was good, or slavery didn't exist, or it was good for the people because right? All of this, whatever, right? Or we're all a nation of immigrants. Actually, no, right? So I think it is, the end game is not to throw out everything, but it's to acknowledge who we are, to be honest, right? Not assigning value, but just to be honest.
Well, it's like the settler, like I'm a settler Canadian, that's not a weighted, it's factual.
Right.
And so is there some way that we're able to incorporate that into our own, in the United States, our own understanding of ourselves? If for whatever, I'm not assigning that to all of you or the viewers, but whatever our identity is.
Right.
And I did put a comment on the screen. I just want to go to that.
I didn't see it.
No. I
saw it.
Yeah, so so this is from Crystal, who says that settlers or colonizers, they come in groups and expect the community to adapt to them. Immigrants come as a small group or a family or an individual, and they learn to adapt to the environment. So
I agree.
Yeah, I agree as well. I think that is the distinction.
But also, I think that notion of settler in the social dynamics and the vocabulary that was used in South Africa, settlers were used in apartheid South Africa, which is basically the same idea. They came as a group and imposing and stealing the land and pushing out those people who had been there, and making the argument that even the blacks who were there had migrated from somewhere and came there. And so they had a legitimate right to push them off and take over. And I think that is the settler mentality.
Yeah. I love your back to what you said, about 20 minutes ago about, you come to my village and you think that you didn't find me, right? I've always been here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jose, what do you think?
Oh, I was just listening to you guys. I'm like, I was hoping that we get to the great discussion that you pointed out about Hamilton, but
well, let's do it. We've got 9 minutes.
I do agree. I do agree with how Crystal and Kofi define what colonizer or settler and what immigrants are, and so I'm still a little confused. I didn't actually was able to comprehend what Kyla's of the Canadian settler is, and so, but we can discuss that later. But yeah, that's to me is it's going with what Susan mentioned in terms of how to prevent us from becoming that. I think I do agree with what you mentioned, how you explain it about being able to acknowledge certain things, right? Because in after you acknowledge that something exists, something was wrong, then you will figure you can at least prevent yourself from adopting the same actions. But I do agree. I do agree with your assessment on that.
Well, lead us into Alexander Hamilton. That chapter was, it
Oh
really
no!
turned
I
everything on
was
its
just.
head.
It was interesting, I guess, to me, because I think Kyla mentioned at the beginning. It's one of the things that she discusses that everybody kind of sees Alexander Hamilton being an immigrant and just coming from the Caribbean to New York and became what he became here. The treasurer in a founding father of the United States, and how dealing with this the Lin Marine Hamilton play is that he did not kind of mention or acknowledge how involved was he in the slavery in the slavery at all, and in how the characters that were actually played by brown and black people, but in the story never touched the slavery piece or even be involved in because I think his wife, you mentioned that his wife family was one of the bigger families that were selling and buying slaves, and that was never kind of mentioned. So it was kind of interesting to me. I my understanding of Hamilton, just to be honest, of the person was, okay, yes, he came from the Caribbean. He was the treasurer. He was one of the person who wrote the Federalist Papers, and so was very kind of enlightening to see, or the perspective that she presented it, and the way that she presented it.
Yeah, and really calling all of us out to, it doesn't detract from Lin-Manuel's work. I mean, because it doesn't have to be an accurate picture, accurate historical picture. But it certainly makes you think, like everybody's celebrating sort of something that actually probably is not true historically, based on a book that he read from somebody who wasn't a historian and made sort of this fantasy about who Hamilton was, is in his essence what she's saying, because the historical documents don't support any of it. So it's like, not to take away the hero for some, because it has been inspirational for many people, the whole Hamilton and Lin-Manuel, right? And just so it felt a little bit like, ouch, right? Because you don't want to tear people's, like, something that has really given them like hope. And I can see myself in something that actually turns out to probably not be true.
When Hamilton came out, and I never got to see it, but that was
Same, I haven't either.
listening to the news items and the commentaries. I even wanted to go to New York if I could find time to go and see it.
Right.
You see, because just like Jose said, some of the things I knew about Hamilton and the way they were glorifying it, then reading this book deflates you. At least for me, it deflated me. And I said, oh, and this is what I had. I was so anxious to go and spend the weekend in a hotel in New York and pay the premium to go and see it. See, because it is an idealized version of the reality. And so basically, it's fictional Hamilton, but not the prose Hamilton.
Yeah. I say, Kofi, go and enjoy it for its musical value and, and the entertainment value, knowing that it's probably not completely accurate.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jose.
No. I was just going to change a little bit, dealing with the Hamilton, the person, not the play, but in terms of how involved he was, kind of in the. What she discusses the militarized, how she put it, the militarized state, in the involvement of how that has led to multiple military actions throughout the throughout the United States history. But go ahead, Kyla, before you can.
Well, there is so much to say. There is so much to say. I did find the part about the Royal Proclamation of 1763. Also, by looking at it, it's in the Hamilton section. But I'm looking at the time.
Yeah. But
Okay.
last thing, Kyla, if I may say something,
Yeah, please.
I think it might be very. I have to be honest, I didn't get to finish it, but there was other sections of the book dealing with the Mexican-American War and what led to the actions, Guadalupe Hidalgo Treaty, where United States took half of Mexico, and so that those kind of examples of the how we glorify the Alamo and what led to that. And so it's a very interesting portions and certain part of the book that will be beneficial to all of us to learn a little bit more than what we learn in our education.
Yeah,
I agree. And I think, I didn't get to finish. This is the first time as well. I did not get to finish all of it because it is really dense. But I am going to continue reading it. And for anybody who's listening who hasn't finished it or is finishing it, you can send us an email, and maybe when the weather gets warm, we can all meet outside at, an outdoor coffee place to sit and talk about it, to have it requires a debriefing, I think, right? It requires talking about it to somebody because it is so dense. So,
I think a book group. I actually think a book group on this would be absolutely fantastic, and we can do something outside, or we can do if we want to get together sooner, we can of course do something over Zoom.
Yeah.
So I just put my email up on the screen for people watching. Please do email us if it would be interesting you just to join us in conversation, and we'll all sit around and talk about it. As Jose said, there is a lot to it. I have all kinds of notes about this concept of self-indigenizing, which is the Protestant Scots Irish and Appalachia she talks about. Hispanos in New Mexico, and I maybe mispronounced that, I apologize, Irish American Catholics, that there was a series, a tradition of colonizers self-indigenizing. So there is so much to unpack, and it is 8 o'clock.
And I love your idea. So maybe if people are interested, shoot Kyla an email. Maybe we can take it chapter by chapter, because it requires slow, and then you have to process and you have to think about it. And maybe, if anybody's interested in really talking through it, because it is a lot, but it is well worth at least just hearing another perspective.
Yeah, I think a chapter by chapter will be good. I'll put it out there to people. I'll put it out to our email list, but also you've all got my email now. Hopefully it's on the screen where you're watching, and you can get in touch with us. I do have to say, I always hate this part, which is that when I get up here and I say that word at a time, because we could talk about this forever. And Kofi, you are such a wonderful person. I love your spirit, your energy. I'm so grateful for you for joining with us and being willing to tackle such a big book with the diversity dialogue. Thank you so much for being with us.
You can't escape now,
Yeah.
No. One item, even though the time is gone, but the freed Africans who were being pushed out of this country, that was another thought I had wanted us to reflect, and maybe next time we can discuss that, because after they've helped build this country, you want to push them out of this country.
Right. After being here almost 200 years at that point, like, bye, Felicia, get out.
There is a lot to talk about. So I think we will find a way, the Office of Human Rights in the library will find a way to continue. And I think a book group discussion where we invite people to join us would be completely fantastic. But Kofi, we're going to be bringing you along for that, because this has been fantastic. For people watching at home, thank you for joining in with us. We do have more events coming up, as always, including one tomorrow night, also in partnership with the library system, also virtual, so you can tune in from wherever you are. We are doing another in our Women in Faith, Diverse Voices Speak series, and this one tomorrow is focusing on how does our faith guide us to deal with intolerance within ourselves. We've talked about how do we deal with hopelessness and how do we deal with difficult times. Now we're saying, okay, maybe I have some hardness in my heart. How does my faith guide me about that? So please join us tomorrow at 7 o'clock. You can find that on our website at which I'm going to put up on screen in just a second. And you can also go to the library at pgcmls.info/events, and our website, tinyurl.com/pgcohr-events. Renee and Jose, thank you very much. You've been such wonderful guest hosts, stepping in after Michelle took her wonderful new opportunity. Thank you both so much for being with us every step of the way. And so to everybody, good night, and thank you so much for being with us.
And thank you, Kyla. Good night.